All right, we want to thank everyone for joining us today as we have everyone entering in. We are also live on Facebook. And so thank you everyone for joining us this evening virtually for our presentation of Quaker Falls Artifacts by Logan Lynch. This evening, it's an event sponsored by the Lawrence County Historical Society, Pleasant Hill Historians, and Westminster College, as we begin to review some of the work that our interns have done. So this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about Quaker Falls artifacts, but first I want to introduce the individuals that are the hosts for this evening from these three respective organizations. For the first is the Lawrence County Historical Society, and today we have with us Jamie Jones, the administrator. Jamie?
Hello, everyone. As Andrew said, my name is Jamie Jones. I'm the administrator of the Lawrence County Historical Society. We are located at the top of North Jefferson Street. We were founded in 1938 by attorney Charles Young. And our mission is to preserve, protect, and promote local history through the preservation of things like artifacts, photographs, documents, and generally just other historically significant items.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Claudia Manley is the volunteer coordinator at the Lawrence County Historical Society. And so we'll be speaking a little bit about how to volunteer at the Historical Society and to get in touch with Claudia. Our next host this evening is going to be Westminster College. And today we have with us Alexis Shello. Alexis, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Alexis Shello on Westminster's Alumni Council with the Young Alumni Committee, and we are really excited to be here and help support Andrew in these internship series. So we have some upcoming alumni events, and I'll put some links in the chat. But just a few things that are coming up. We have a business holiday market, an in-person alternative gift market on Wolves today, and then on the 5th of November, so tomorrow. Veterans Day service on the 11th, and a happy hour upcoming in Pittsburgh. And we are actually taking nominations. So if you know anyone you want to nominate for Alumni Council or want to nominate yourself, I'll put the link in the chat for that as well. And then also keep an eye out for our crowdfunding that will be in January. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions. And thank you, Andrew.
Of course, our next individual is Dr. John Winters.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm a visiting assistant professor of history here at Westminster College. And I'm very excited to sit in on these exhibitions of students showcasing their incredible work that is interdisciplinary in nature and that really gets to the heart of some serious historical questions and things that not only are local, but then it can also touch sort of national, much larger movements. My own work focuses a lot on Native American history, and I've worked in a series of museums, large and small, for the past almost 10 years. I'm very excited to see the new ways that students approach public history and history in the public.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Winters. Also, we would like to recognize Dr. Russell Martin, who is the chair of the History and Philosophy Department at Westminster and is a professor of history, as well as Jennifer Huff, who is the assistant director of the Professional Development Center, who was integral in coordinating a lot of these memberships. Our next host is, again, myself. My name is Andrew Henley. I'm the president and founder of Pleasant Hill Historians. I'm also a board member of the Historical Society and an alumnus of Westminster. So I represent all three organizations in some capacity at some point. But I also want to introduce my colleague and a student of Westminster College, Gabrielle Lucas.
Everyone, like Andrew said, I'm Gabby. I'm a senior at Westminster and I'm a political science and history double major. And I work for Andrew as an associate historian, which kind of boils down to I do whatever he asks me to do. But I worked on stuff like Cascade Park, which was last week's presentation, and Quakertown and things like that.
Gabby has also helped us publish 2 books and has assisted in writing, if not took the lead in writing, a successful National Register eligibility reevaluation for Cascade Park. We've also partnered with the Museum of Modern Art, the Society of French Protestantism, the Luis da Silva Ribeiro Public Library and Regional Archives in Terceira, Portugal, the Yon Departmental Archives in Auxerre, France, the Huguenot Museum in Rochester, England, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, the Lawrence County Government, Arts and Education at the Hoyt, the Lawrence County Historical Society, the City of Newcastle, Sense of Connection, Youngstown State University, Slippery Rock University, University of Pittsburgh, and Carnegie Mellon University. And we provide student internships for Chatham University, Clarion University, Duquesne University, and of course, this evening, Westminster College. And so I would like to take a quick photo opportunity. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we will take a few snapshots of everyone here this evening. So go ahead and smile. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I do have a few other items to go over. We are just going to have the introductions, which this is, our presentation. We'll have a short Q&A session at the end and our conclusion. While you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. As well as during the Q&A session, you're welcome to raise your hand during the Q&As. If you see that graphic on the right, it's under the reactions, and you can hit raise hand. And so then this will be recorded and posted to the Historical Society's YouTube page afterwards. And I would like to ask at this moment, if you're in this group chat on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, just state who is the furthest away that's participating today. I know last week we had somebody from Sydney, Australia. Ocean City, Maryland. Sydney, Australia once again. So Washington, D.C., very nice. I don't think anyone's going to beat Sydney, Australia once again. But I appreciate you all joining. Last week, we also had somebody from Los Angeles, as well as Nevada and Arkansas. And so I appreciate you all joining us from around the world. Now, without further ado, and to present the presentation this evening, I'll introduce our presenter, Logan Minch. So I'll ask Logan to go ahead and share his screen.
Okay, here we go. See if I can do it. Well, hi everyone. I am Logan Minch, as Andrew already stated, and this fall I've had the privilege of working alongside Andrew and a lot with Gabby as well on the Quaker Falls artifacts. And I don't think I really realized what I was getting myself into when I signed up for the internship. And the first day, Andrew took me on a hike in the woods. So I got to see the whole site and it was a lot of fun. But now I get to work with some really cool artifacts, and I've met some really cool people too along the way. Actually, I am a Westminster graduate. I'm going to graduate in the spring in 22. So, but also, without further ado, this is the Quaker Falls artifacts. I'm actually going to start the presentation by handing it off to Gabby, because I have the privilege of working alongside her as a peer in a classroom as well. And she's done some really cool, extensive research on Quakerism in general, and she is much more knowledgeable than me on the subject, especially with the beliefs, the founding, and North America. So that's what she's going to cover here. And then I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Okay, hi again, everyone, and thanks, Logan, for introducing me. So today we're going to start with the founding of the Quakers. So the Quakers are a Protestant group that broke away from the Church of England in the mid-17th century. Quakerism was founded by a man named George Fox, who was born in England in 1624. And by the time he was a young adult, Fox began to have a lot of doubts about the ability of the so-called Christians in his life to really live their beliefs truly, saying in his journal that they did not possess what they professed. So during this period, Fox began to travel the country a lot, seeking out priests and other religious scholars to see if he could find an answer to his doubts. So also during the same period that Fox was traveling, England was going through a period of immense social and political turmoil, with the First English Civil War beginning in 1642. So this war stemmed from conflict between Parliament and King Charles I. And this came from Charles had an absolutist view of his power that stemmed from his belief in the divine right of kings, which said that monarchs were mandated by God to rule. And this was a pretty big contrast from the rule of his father, James I, who had been much more accommodating to Parliament. And this had led to a growing sense of importance with the English aristocracy, who made up the Parliamentary House of Lords, and who were especially important when raising tax revenue. So tensions also arose during this period due to Charles's Catholic beliefs and the mainly Protestant Parliament. So the First English Civil War would ultimately end with Charles under house arrest in 1646. However, in 1649, Charles would be executed and the monarchy was temporarily replaced with Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth. So the chaos of this period of English history, especially regarding new religious ideas and conflict and varying degrees of religious tolerance, would serve as a backdrop for this formation of George Fox's ideas into the organized religion of Quakerism. So in 1647, at the height of all of this turmoil and in the middle of Fox's travels, he purported to hear a voice saying that there is one God, even Jesus Christ, who can speak to thy condition, which meant that Christ was the only one who could speak to God's love and divinity, rather than any human teachers or like religious clergy. This became the basis of the Quaker tenet of the inner light, which states that the Spirit of God can be found inside anyone and everyone's heart. So after this epiphany, Fox began preaching intermittently around the country, urging listeners to listen to that inner voice of Christ and sharing the ideals of compassion and honesty, which would also become really prominent principles of Quakerism. So 1652 is generally considered to be the official beginning of organized Quakerism, as this is when Fox traveled to Pendle Hill in Lancashire, England, which was considered by locals to be frequented by demons. So on the hill, Fox didn't see any demons, but he had a vision of many souls coming together and finding Christ. And by this point, Fox had accumulated many followers as well as many opponents. So he and his followers were regularly jailed and beaten and faced other persecution. But this persecution really served to cement Fox's belief that Quakerism's tenets were the right thing and he was doing the right thing. Can you go ahead and go to the next slide, please? So talking about Quakerism and its beliefs, that concept of the inner light is probably the most essential tenet of Quakerism, and it's the basis for pretty much the rest of these principles. So that idea that everyone had a piece of God inside of them served to create a unity between all people in the world. It also connects to this idea that people can have a direct and personal experience with God, and they don't need any religious authority or clergy to guide them. So it also says that there's good and evil inside of all people, and it's up to us to choose that. And everyone has the power to choose good over evil if they really want to. So based on the inner light, Quakerism has four main principles, which are also called testimonies. Simplicity refers to valuing the spirit over material objects, allowing for fewer distractions that would prevent people from hearing God's word. Peace really just refers to what is pretty well known. The Quakers are all pacifists for the most part. Integrity highlights the importance of a person's outer life, reflecting their inner life, which relates to that inner light we talked about earlier and choosing that good inside of you versus choosing the evil. Community refers to members supporting one another on their journey in faith, as well as creating a space where everyone feels welcome. And this is related to another sub-principle of equality, which focuses on respecting different people and different ideas. And this once again comes from the inner light, which says that there's a piece of God in everyone, and therefore everyone is equal in the eyes of God. And this is also why, from the beginning, Quakerism has really included women in their religious services and any authority that they hold in there, which is a big change from Christianity because there's even today a lot of modern Christian groups that really don't accept women in positions of power, but Quakerism has always kind of held that everyone is equal. So the final testimony of stewardship is related to simplicity in that it highlights the importance of caring for the earth and everyone that lives there and using the earth's resources wisely. So finally, another important aspect of Quakerism that's kind of important to mention is that this religion doesn't have an established creed, and it instead really emphasizes that everyone should come to their own conclusions about God and religion by themselves. So doubting what's being told to you and a lot of like introspection, looking into that inner light is really encouraged, and they're considered valuable tools for spiritual growth. And this is one of the reasons I think that Quakers faced a lot of persecution, because during this time, like the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches were really, really powerful, and the religious clergy were really powerful within them. And the Quakers didn't need any of that. So they didn't need to subscribe to any of these clergymen who were trying to keep authority. So in addition, Quakers also don't have elaborate ceremonies, and they don't follow the Bible as the only one word of God. And they don't have these ceremonies because they're considered distracting from the true word of God and that introspection inside of yourself. Can you go to the next slide, please? So finally, the Quakers' emphasis on free thinking and this lack of reliance on religious authority made them the subjects of really fierce persecution by the English government through several periods. And as a result of this, as well as just that general desire to spread Quaker beliefs to other areas, some Quakers began moving to the New World, with the first of them arriving in the Massachusetts Bay Colony around 1656. So Quakers in Massachusetts were once again initially subject to really fierce persecution there as well, which led to a lot of people to settle in Rhode Island, which was a colony that had relative religious freedom, especially compared to Massachusetts. And then also eventually they began to settle in the colony of Pennsylvania, which, as I'm sure most of us know, was founded by the prominent Quaker William Penn in 1681. So Penn was given the charter by King Charles II because by this period, Oliver Cromwell had died and the monarchy had eventually been restored. But he was given the land by Charles II to settle a debt that he had owed to Penn's father. Penn established this colony as a haven for religious freedom and advertised it to Quakers and other religious groups that were being persecuted at this time, that it would be a safe place for them to come and live. So over time, more settlers came to Pennsylvania and more individual Quaker settlements began to crop up as a result of this. And so these settlements moved westward with European and American settler expansion into the frontier. And this kind of includes Edinburgh's Quakertown in 1799. And so that brings us to Quakertown, and that's where I will hand everything back to Logan.
Thanks so much, Gabby. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so now we get to go back to Quakertown after that great overview by Gabby. So just a few things about the site first and foremost. The original ownership of the Quakertown site, which is located in Mahoning Township in Lawrence County in Western Pennsylvania. The original ownership was by a man by the name of John White. And he received the land through a Revolutionary War land grant. And at the time of the American Revolution, after the American Revolution was won, the American former colonies, now states, did not have a ton of money. They were in a lot of debt after the war. But what they did have was copious amounts of land, especially in Pennsylvania, which they urged people to settle Western Pennsylvania in these areas that were unclaimed in the Western Pennsylvania, but had previous Native American settlements, and they were still there for the most part. But John White and other American soldiers during the war that had received land grants oftentimes did sell the land grants to other people to make a profit off of that. So that's exactly what John White did. And he actually sold it to a man by the name of Septimus Cadwallader in 1799 to 1804. And that's when the land was settled, along with the Sharpless, Shearer, and Townsend families. And they moved from Brownsville, Fayette County, PA. Upon moving there, they established the Cadwallader Frame House in 1799 to 1804. And then eventually they established the 1804 Stone House that still stands. Well, it doesn't still stand. The remains can still be seen today at the Quakertown site. This is a picture of the original plots of land, actually, which is cool. They actually had different names. So Kensington is the plot, the original plot, and then Portsmouth is also one of the names, the original plots of land. This is where the settlers moved from in southwestern PA. And then this actually is a picture, if I can move my Zoom icons, of the original settlement of Quakertown. And these black dots are actually houses where people lived. This is the Mahoning River. And then there's actually a bridge, if you follow my mouse over here, that would take them across the river to a canal to the north of the river. And then now we're to why are we here today? So the Quaker Falls Recreation Area was a project for the park. It began under Commissioners Dan Vogler, Steve Craig, and the late Robert Del Signor in 2015. The ribbon cutting ceremony was actually last week on October 26, 2021, which is pretty cool. So it's a very newly established recreational area, and it was in hopes to bring awareness to historical sites and beautify Lawrence County. The Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources paid for actually most of the site they paid for all but $20,000. And then they asked Andrew Henley, my internship advisor, and he researched the history of the site with help from Youngstown State University, Duquesne University, Mohawk Area High School, and Westminster College. And they designed the signs that detail, and he designed the signs that detail the park's history. And there's 4 signs around the park. So a lot of you are probably sitting here and asking, why Quakertown? Why is this important? And I'll give you a few reasons. The site gives context to the newly established Quaker Falls Recreation Area, which it's important to understand why the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources donated so much money, why these people put so much time into creating the recreational area and so many hours of research. It's also a significant archaeological site, and Dr. John White worked on that, and we'll get to him next. It's also the oldest collection of Quaker families in the county. It was a stop on the Underground Railroad. I find this to be the most significant thing personally on the list. A lot of the people within the community were conductors on the Underground Railroad, as well as a lot of people just helped in their former slaves' way north. And this was in response to the Fugitive Slave Act. And they were very, very upset about the passing of that. And the artifacts tell a story about the people who lived in Quakertown. And that's something we're going to get into pretty deeply here in a little bit. And the artifacts themselves are back in Lawrence County after 40 years of being with YSU. They were being used for research, and they could be used by any of the students. But at the same time, now they're back in Lawrence County where they belong. So this guy is Dr. John White. And Dr. John White was the head of the archaeology department at YSU from 1995 to 2005. But his story starts a bit earlier. He earned his associate bachelor's degree from City College of San Francisco, and then his BA from San Francisco State University, and then his MA and PhD from Oregon State University. 3 years after he earned his PhD, Dr. John White earned full professor status at Youngstown State University, which is pretty impressive. Also, Dr. John White was a distinguished professor in 1979, 1981, 1985, and 2005. So not only was he very well respected within his field, but also we've had the privilege of talking to a few of his people that were on the site with him on a couple of his digs. And they all said he was very, very personable and very interpersonally intelligent. He's a very good guy. They jokingly called him the Indiana Jones of the time in Western PA, which, I mean, I wasn't alive then, but I guess at the time that was a pretty big deal. But anyways, regardless, he worked on the Quakertown collection through Youngstown State University, and Youngstown State University acquired the collection and then donated to Lawrence County Historical Society, as I mentioned earlier. So Dr. White's methodology is actually pretty cool. Dr. John White worked on the site from 1979 to 1982. And the best look we have at his methodology is actually his article entitled Wells as Artifacts. And although Dr. John White knew that some things about wells are dependent on what materials are at locations and who could craft a well, he also wanted everyone to pay close attention to the idiosyncrasies in the well and how certain things can be looked over. So oftentimes people will take items out of wells and look at them as artifacts, but they forget about the wells themselves. Dr. John White did not want anyone to forget about the wells, because if you look at how the well was constructed, where it was constructed, when it was constructed, who it was constructed by, you can start to find a lot of different really cool things about the community just by looking at the wells themselves, and then look at the artifacts closer. Dr. John White and his team led a controlled surface pickup of the site. And after that, they found 10 wells. Dr. White's hypothesis on wells led him to be able to break down the wells into 4 styles, or people constructing the wells in different ways. Wells 2, 4, and 5 were all in close proximity to one another by 2 homes, and they shared a similar traits as to having a raised rim and being made of rough sandstone. They are also very well crafted, and 2 of the 3 had slate bottoms. So he makes that his first subcategory of well. Then the second subcategory of well that Dr. White makes is wells 9 and 10. They were part of the earliest development in Quakertown, and they both have no bottom work. They are also made of a regularly cut sandstone with specially cut curved ramps. Wells 1 and 7 could be connected, and Dr. John White concluded that the resident from well 7 more than likely made the general store well, which was well 1. And both were made of field stone boulders and had wooden plank bottoms, no face work, and they were of pretty low quality. Then the last category of wells is wells 3, 6, and 8, and they had less in common than they had in common. But he wanted to make this a fourth subcategory, and he thinks in his work he does assume that the railroad company likely constructed the depot well, which was well 8. Along with the wells after the surface pickup, Dr. White and his team found 8 homes, a school, a general store, 3 mills, 1 mill dam, 3 barns, a railroad depot, 7 sections of mill race, a cemetery, 2 sections of sandstone quarries, 3 coal mines, a wheel pit, a bridge, and other features including roads, property lines, stone dress springs, and revetments. So then Dr. White gets into the periodization of the wells, which is pretty important in understanding when certain buildings were constructed and when the wells were constructed. You can start to see some of these things. Wells 9 and 10 were crucial to understanding the rest of the site. And this is because the Zemsky well, well 9, and the Cadwallader well, well 10, can be dated to the Quaker period of early development. This is along with wells 2, 4, and 5. By virtue, we can also assume that well 3, which is also a spring, is also from the Quaker period. But because the general store well was established in 1870, it can be assumed that well 1 is also established then, And this is by the man who lived in the residency by well 7. His name was Falian Ludwig, and it's presumed that he made it for a commission during the agricultural period. We can also more than likely conclude that once Quakertown reached its potential growth limit with population, that's when well 8 was probably constructed as well. Now that we've gone over Dr. White's methodology, we do get to now look at some of the things within the wells in the sites. The biggest problem with the Quakertown collection is that there is no site map. So most of what we know is if something came out of the well, we can pin it down to a location, but we don't know where any of the sites were, more than likely, unless we can get a hold of that site map, which we have not been able to. So the first one does come from a site, which I wish it was coming for a well, but I wanted to show you all this clay pipe because I think it's so cool. But this clay pipe comes from site 2, and it's a spur bowl clay pipe. Dating a pipe can be extremely difficult, but upon research, the best way to do so is by looking at different parts of the pipe. Pipe stems did not change often through time very much, but to date the pipe, we used a pipe archive from the UK. And in particular, this bowl form is the best way to date this pipe. And when you're looking at bowl formations, there are 2 different kinds of bowl formations. A heel, which is a term used for a flat-based projection underneath the bowl pipe, which typically has near vertical sides or ones that flare out towards its base. And a heel is usually broader than it is deep. And this is different than a spur, which a spur is the exact opposite. A spur is a term used for a projection underneath the bowl that is usually longer than it is broad. This pipe has a spur on the bottom, and because of this, it makes it a little bit more easily to identify. We found 2 kinds of archival pipes that help us to date this particular pipe. Both had very similar features to the Site 2 pipe. The first archival pipe that we found was from the Hawkins article in 2013, which it was similar to the H34 pipe, which I will show you. And the H34 pipe had the same stem, spur, and decorative bowl as our pipe. Also, the other pipe that was very similar, the other pipe that was very similar that we also found was from an Oswald article attached to the same archival link. And that in that article, pipes 12 and 14 had very skinny stems and a spur along the bowl, shaped almost identical to the one we have. The archive in the Oswald collection had no like decorative things on the bowl, so it was hard to kind of pin that down. So we just put 12 and 14 down both for that. Both sets of archival pipes were dated from 1760 to 1820. And since Quakertown was not settled until 1800, we can assume, or we can conclude that 1800 to 1820 is when the spurt bowl pipe is from. The next really cool article or artifact we get to look at is a Hubley cast iron model race car. And this was found in the general store well, which is well 1, which the general store began operation in 1870. And once again, wells 1 and 7 were presumed to be constructed by Falian Ludwig, and it was probably for a commission, given that the materials were not very good and the construction was relatively poor. Toy cars are oftentimes modeled after automobiles of the era. This make of the toy car is similar to a 1912 Roadster, which I'll show you all in the next slide. The car is made of cast iron, and this is also a clear indication that there's children in Quakertown and they had access to toys. So Hubley Manufacturing Company was established in 1894 by John Hubley. in Lancaster, PA. They began producing toys in 1909. They made a number of toys. Whenever they started making toys, they were all made of cast iron. They ranged from horse-drawn carriages to dogs, tractors, shovels, and guns. The car pictured on the right is what the toy more than likely was. And this is a Hubley race toy race car. That's a Roadster. The Roadster on the left was taken from the 1912 World Motor magazine with no make of the car given. But we're almost positive that it was made off of this car, and that's what the toy was modeled after. The third artifact we have is a bisque doll ear, and this is found from well 2. So first I'll clue you all in on what well 2 was. But not much was known about well 2 other than it was a residential well, and it was in close proximity to wells 4 and 5. The well is said to be of good construction and demonstrated some sort of time and effort being put into the well. Well 2 is made of a rough cut sandstone rim buttress, that a rim buttress with especially cut curb, flat piece of slate on the bottom of the well, and is close proximity to 2 residencies and a barn. But this doll ear more than likely is from a bisque doll manufactured between the late 1800s and 1930. Most of these dolls had been constructed with a porcelain head, and some included arms and hands that were also made of porcelain. The body was usually constructed of perishable materials. Production of the dolls started in the Thuringia region of Germany, but after high demand for the dolls in the US, many companies within the US started to produce the dolls as well. This would allow for easy access to dolls in the Quakertown community as well. The next item we get to look at is a Rome coffee pot. So when I originally had looked at this with Andrew, we believed that this was a tea kettle at first, but then we figured it out that it was a coffee pot. And the way we figured this out was, although it may look like a tea kettle at first glance, how you used to brew coffee in the time was to make coffee. You put grounds in it and you brought it to a boil. The grounds would rise to the top, and then the stout was stationed at the bottom so that when you poured the coffee, you wouldn't get the grounds in it. The coffee pot pictured on the left was made by the Rome Manufacturing Company, and the one on the right shares many similar features to this. The Rome Locomotive Company was turned into the Rome Manufacturing Company in 1916, and although the wooden handle has decayed from the copper pot, it is likely the same model. And this particular coffee pot was made from 1918 onward and features an elephant trunk-like stout. Next, we have one of the only prehistoric or pre-Quakertown artifacts, and this is an arrowhead that we found from Site 2. And the best history of activity in the area that would become Quakertown is from a phase 1 archaeology study that the county commissioned Christine Davis to do, and it was entitled Quaker Falls Development, Mahoning Township, Lawrence County, PA, or phase 1. And she explored early Native American activity in the region. She stated that during the Beaver Wars, which were a long period of aggression between the Iroquois nations and Eastern Woodland tribes, they wanted to take land in the Ohio Valley from these tribes. And among these tribes were the Delaware and the Shawnee. The Shawnee and the Delaware eventually crossed the Allegheny Mountains to occupy the lands in the upper Ohio Valley that still remained under the Iroquois control. Some of these refugee groups banded together in small villages, and other occupied single cabins, small farmsteads, and training stations throughout the region. For some reason, the same land was very attractive to people in Quakertown. It's also valuable to Native Americans as well. It is valued highly because Native Americans you often could use Falling Stream Run, which is where Quakertown is located on, and as a natural highway to travel and hunt. The Seneca Indians were present in northwestern PA and western New York, but the Delaware Nation and the Shawnee were more than likely the tribe that this arrowhead is from. The next artifact is a Pabst bottle from well number 1, and this is my personal favorite. Although it may seem astonishing at first glance to see a domestic beer from so far away in Milwaukee, it's less far-fetched than it seems. And this is because the original owner of Pabst, Frederick Pabst, was a real estate mogul and opened bars in almost every major city in the US. And these bars would only serve Pabst beer because he thought it was a great business model. And then by the 1900s, in the turn of the century, Pabst was a household name. So in the 1930s, Pabst started to create cans. So it can't be past the 1930s. And during the 1920s, Pabst actually did shut down production during Prohibition. And this particular bottleneck is a crown cap finish bottleneck. And if it is mouth blown, it is from before 1910. But if you can see the side of the bottle, it has a manufacturing seal. So it had to be between 1910 and 1920 because it has that crown cap finish, but it also has the manufacturing, and it's not a can. Also, I wanted to tell you guys that of all the bottles, both soda and beer bottles that were found on the site, there were more Pabst bottles than anything else, which I thought was kind of cool that there was a favorite brand for the Quakertown residents. The next artifact is a Shanks bottle, and it is actually a seaweed tonic bottle. It was prescribed as a remedy as a digestive aid, and Joseph H. Shank and Sons Medicine Company was out of Philadelphia, and then mass-produced tonic and other herbal remedies. Shank started to produce the seaweed tonic after the Civil War, and that's what it gained a ton of popularity. And it actually is advertised until 1942. The artifact is from Site 13, and it can be dated between 1870 and 1910. It's a relatively conservative estimate, but we didn't want to try to narrow it down further and not be correct. We know the bottle is no later than 1910 because the bottle was hand blown, and you can see that because there's no seal marks from machine manufacturing. But also the only way to date the bottle past that 40-year span is if we had a bottleneck, which we don't have along with it, which is a shame because I really wanted to look into that a little bit further. The next artifact, and it's going to be our last one for today, is from Site 2, and it's a Crotal bell. And it's probably from the Quaker period. Typically, Crotal bells were made of bronze, which this one is. And they're known as rattle bells, and they're used for horse-drawn vehicles to alert others that something's coming, especially other horse-drawn vehicles in low visibility, nighttime, or foggy areas. And this Crotal bell was relatively hard to date, actually. So we used three things and three features about the bell that helped us date it. The first being that the bell was made in one piece. This makes the bell at least the 16th century onward, which is a cool place mark for that. Furthermore, when the cast loop meets the bell's body, it's made of a small drill hole. This allows the bell to be from the 18th or early 19th century. And then because the bell has no visible decorations, it is likely that is not from after the 19th century. This puts the bell around the Quaker or early industrial period. The significance of the bell shows that there was likely multiple horse-drawn carriages because they were probably trying to avoid an accident with one another. I mean, also with bystanders on walking, but at the same time, you really don't want to get in a crash with another horse-drawn buggy. So how do you use these articles for research, or the artifacts for research? First, you have to look back to Dr. White's article as well as artifacts. And the process that Dr. White used for the wells you can see how the community developed, one, and two, it can be a forgotten artifact that's glossed over often in history. You take the items out, you get excited about the items, and then you forget about the well. Well, Dr. White wanted everyone to remember not to lose sight about those little intricate things that can tell you so much about a community. Also, you can see the process the wells are made, you can see the kind of people building them, and that's the really cool part about the wells. But once you look past the wells and you do actually get into the artifacts, you can see a lot of different things about the community and how they lived. First, you can see that there was a Native American who probably walked the stream and lost an arrow hunting or just traveling before the settlement of Quakertown. And then if you think of the Crotal Belt, we know that there was a need in fog or low visibility to alert others that a horse was coming. And this is downstream from a waterfall in a valley, so it was probably often foggy. The Shanks bottle shows that somebody believed that the seaweed tonic would actually cure their indigestion, which who knows if it actually worked or it was just a placebo, but I'd like to think it did. Also, the Pabst bottle shows that somebody drank beer in Quakertown, whether it was a Quaker, a non-Quaker, a kid or an adult, but we can see that somebody enjoyed Pabst beer very much. Somebody also drank coffee and had a relatively nice coffee pot. And there were kids who played with a toy car and abyss dolls, and probably somebody smoking a pipe, a clay pipe and watching them. There were significant challenges we faced, and I already talked about the sitemap, but the sitemap was a lot. It made it a big struggle, especially with the artifacts from the sites, because we found a lot of cool things from the sites that were really hard to pin down as to where they were. And that's something we would like to get a hold of in the future. But dating the artifacts is also a very challenging research excursion that me and Andrew worked pretty hard on. Andrew was very, very helpful in guiding me through that process. The Cadwallader well seems like we need a lot more context with it, and we don't have that many artifacts from it, which is a little alarming. But also identifying the artifacts is challenging at times as well, but once you pin it down, it's a lot easier to date the artifacts. The other thing is most of the collection is animal skeletal remains. And because I don't have a biology degree, there are a lot of days where I sat there and looked at something, and then I'd go to Andrew and say, is this a pelvis, or is it a kneecap, or is it, and Andrew would just go, just put it back, we'll figure it out. So that was kind of a very fun portion of the internship thus far. I've learned just to avoid the bones and work on things I know how to do best. But that also concludes my part of the presentation, but I'd like to thank a few people before I hand it over to Andrew. But first, I'd like to thank Andrew Henley and the Pleasant Hill historians. And he was a huge help with me through this whole process. Sat down with me on multiple occasions, said, Logan's going to be okay. So that was a lot of fun and a big help. And thank you so much, Andrew. Also, Dr. Martin, my advisor, he's the chair of the history department. He's a great guy. I really appreciate everything you've done for me thus far. He actually helped encourage me to do this internship too, and I'm really happy that I did. Also, Gabby, thank you for everything with regard to helping me and telling me I'm a knucklehead for these 4 years, because it's been a lot of fun. Also, thanks for helping me present today. And the County of Lawrence and Commissioners Dan Vogler, who's also an 81 graduate of Westminster College, Morgan Boyd, Loretta Spielvogel, and then former Commissioners Steve Craig and Bob Del Signor. The Department of Planning and Community Development, and in particular, Amy McKinney, Danielle Russell and Rebecca Schaefer, Alan Miller, and Mary Glass. And then furthermore, the former Pleasant Hill historian interns, Carly Plessick and Aiden Witherspoon, Youngstown State University, in particular, Dr. Matt Omansky, and the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences there. Also, Lawrence County Historical Society, Struthers Historical Society, along with W. Zetz and Marion Kuletsa. Sorry if I just butchered your name, because I did. Also, Brian Fritz and the Department of Conservation of Natural Resources for donating the money, in the Quakertown Cemetery cleanup crew, which will be coming soon. I am actually going to let Gabby talk about that because she's organizing it. But thank you all for bearing with me and sitting here listening. It means a lot. Appreciate it.
Okay, so hi again, everyone. So over the past about a year, Pleasant Hill Historians has been putting together some various visits to the Quakertown site. The first one was in August, I believe, of 2020. We came and we cleaned up the cemetery that's on the site. It was basically unwalkable because of brush and trees and overgrowth, so we cleaned that out. And so we are actually planning a second cleanup day for November 14th at 2 p.m. At Quakertown to kind of clean up what little bit has grown back since that summer, as well as to clean up a lot of the leaves and little stuff from the ground, because we're cleaning it up in preparation for potentially having most likely Dr. Madamansky from YSU bringing ground penetrating radar to kind of examine and investigate the cemetery and see how many bodies really are buried in there, if any have been moved, things like that. We're putting together this cleanup day to do that. And if anyone is interested, after I'm done speaking, I'm going to drop a link to the Google form in our chat. Or if you want to share with anyone else who is also interested, we would really love to have you, because it's really a cool experience to see the site and to see this cemetery.
Awesome. Thank you, Logan and Gabby, for a great presentation. I'm going to go ahead and begin our Q&A session. And so if you are willing to ask a question, or if you have a really large question, please go ahead and use the raise your hand function, or you can just drop it in the chat and we can go ahead and ask that. Ben, we have a question from you. Go ahead.
Thank you, and great work on this project. My question is, what happened to the community after its heyday, and how does the historical site integrate into the new Quaker Falls recreation area?
So with on behalf of your first part of your question, so this is exactly what happened. As soon as industrialization really took off in and around Youngstown and Warren and different industrializing areas, more people moved away from farming and subsistence farming to go make a living in areas like Youngstown, and they started to move away one by one. And as soon as this happened, the community started to slowly give way to industrialization. So it is a part of urbanization during industrialization, but they also, I mean, they had a pretty long run as an agricultural community, but that's pretty much what happened is they started to move away slowly during industrialization. What was the second half of your question, Ben? Sorry, I apologize.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I guess it was two questions. How is this historical site integrated into the new park? Or is it?
So Andrew has placed those 4 signs around along with the commissioners. That's it thus far. There's plans for phase 2. I know that, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if Andrew would like to elaborate on that a little bit more for me.
Actually, I'd like to pass the mic over to Commissioner Vogler, who is happy to join us this evening. And so, Dan, if you don't mind talking about that.
No, thank you very kindly, Andrew. And I have to say to Logan and Gabby, how intriguing and interesting your presentation has been tonight. I'm just absolutely fascinated by everything that you have presented to us. And can't say enough about my friend Andrew Henley and all that he's done, not only at this site in Mahoning Township, but throughout the entire county on many, many and varied historical sites and locations around the county. We're blessed to have him in our community, and I hope we never lose him. The site's a large site. It starts from US Route 224, and it works its way north towards the Mahoning River and drops down to a set of railroad tracks, which are still active. And then there's a second parcel of property to the north of those tracks, between the tracks and the Mahoning River, that we have are in the process of securing in terms of ownership. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Andrew, that is the site of the Cadwallader Stone House, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And, ultimately, we want to enhance the capability of people being able to walk throughout that acreage. And we have to take it a step at a time. And it's been very, very helpful. And I'm glad Logan included one of the signages that Andrew put together that are near the waterfall. And that particular site is very close to US 224. You don't have to walk very far to see it. But as we move forward, and the fact also that you have the cemetery further down the hill, eventually that might be a place where some historical reference signs can be placed. So that's down the road, but we're anxious to get there. One of the more immediate things that we're working on, it's more of a safety aspect than a historical aspect. But at the waterfall site, there are very steep cliffs on either side of Falling Run. Did I get it right, Andrew? Falling Run's stream?
Falling Spring Run.
Excuse me, Falling Spring Run. Thank you. And we have a meeting set up here in the near future to try to secure some grant money for appropriate safety fencing, because we certainly don't want people to get hurt as they're admiring the beauty of the waterfall. And I know I've taken a long time to answer your question. I apologize, but suffice to say, this is only the beginning, and we have a lot more planned, and we just have to take it a step at a time. And I also can't say enough about our planning department. And Logan, I appreciate your mentioning their names as well: Amy McKinney and Danielle Russell and Rebecca Schaefer and the rest of the folks. They've worked very hard, and they've worked very closely with Andrew. And then finally, my previous two fellow county commissioners, my good friend Steve Craig and my very good friend Bob Del Signor, who passed away unfortunately last year. They were excited about the development of this park, and thanks to them and some other folks, it's come to fruition. So forgive my long-windedness, but I hope that helps.
That's all right. Thank you, Dan. We have a question by Dr. Winters.
Thank you, Andrew, very much. Well, first, Logan and Gabby, great presentation. Starting with Gabby, wonderful job on detailing the history of the Quakers, right? It's a community, it's a people, it's a religion that ultimately turned into even a political philosophy that is really important to the colonization of the New World, to the foundation of the United States. And Logan's mentioned then of this site as being a stop on the Underground Railroad, right? Let's not forget that the Quakers from the very beginning, George Fox himself, were anti-slavery, right? So there is this moral component to this story that can't go overlooked. And so I really appreciated that you brought Quakerism so strongly into this presentation. And Logan, we've chatted multiple times now. It's a pleasure to finally see your work in action and to see what you've actually been doing all this time. It's really fascinating. It's hard to kind of make historical sense out of archaeological material, right? Archaeologists ask very different questions than historians do. So kudos to you for making sense of all this. I love at the end where you were sort of building this narrative for us, right? The foggy waterfall with the bells, right? And children playing with doll and all these different things. I mean, this is the stuff that tours are made out of. This is the stuff that audio tours are made out of and digital tours are made out of. I mean, so in my mind's eye, I'm envisioning a million different spin-off projects of the work that you've already done. But of course, that is casting pretty far into the future. But I was generally curious, particularly when you were engaging with this archaeological material, right? This physical record. You talked about Dr. White's methodology, which is great. I mean, you really have to grapple with the person who did this first and the person who organized and made sense of this at the beginning. But I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about your methodology as you approach this. How were you conceiving of these objects? Did you have an end goal in mind? Or was it sort of diving in head first to see what happened?
There definitely was a lot of diving in head first. I remember the first day Andrew brought me into the church where we're assessing the actual artifacts, and it's just boxes on boxes of artifacts from different sites. And then he also told me that we have no site map. And I said, well, how do we figure out where these ones were from? And he said, well, we're going to figure out, it's going to be okay, Logan, calm down. So there's a lot of Andrew also helping me with my methodology too. Andrew has been such a great help with helping me find different ways to date these and figure out what they were. There are times, honestly, if Andrew was the one who explained to me what a Crodal bell was. If he didn't tell me that, I probably would have thought it was on Santa Claus. But we figured it out, and it's okay. So dating and methodologically finding them, I feel like one of my strongest aspects with my own methodology was definitely the bottles, because I got really interested in those. So I really kind of latched onto those. I probably spent a little too much time on bottles, but the more you could find about how through time they changed the different ways they produce things, the more the methodology became kind of clear with a lot of these different things. And was particularly with like finding different things for this presentation, because there's a lot of really cool artifacts in the collection, but there's also a lot of stuff that it's a lot of bones. There's a lot of sifting through bones and saying, well, these are glass shards. What are we going to do with that? And then stitching them together and trying to figure out what they were. The Shanks bottle actually was in like 8 different pieces at least. So, and that was already put back together by, I'm pretty sure it was Dr. White's team, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff too, and figuring out what different things are, that kind of led me to figure some of these things out. But I think that Andrew definitely helped a lot with my methodology and helping me find a lot of different articles to help me date things. And there was a lot of different, like, just look back through how they used to produce things, and then reading a lot up on like stuff like the Bestall. I knew nothing about how baby dolls were made in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but now I'm relatively familiar with the process, which I think is it's pretty cool, but it's just different. It's something I've never experienced before, so it definitely was a dive headfirst and kind of deal. Also, thank you so much, Dr. Winters.
We have another question by Jeff McCandless. Jeff?
Hi, thanks everybody for your presentations. These are really fascinating. As a history buff person, I love this particular point in time in our country's history. Logan, I'm also a Pabst man, so I'm with you there, although could never find really cool bottles like that. And Gabby, it's nice to know you like to hang around in cemeteries, but I'll pass on that activity, so thank you. My question is Logan, you mentioned something that may seem relatively insignificant, but sometimes these are questions that I ask. You mentioned underground railroad conductors. And do you have any insight as to, can you tell me a little bit about what that role is and what those persons, what role they performed and how they got to be underground conductors?
Yeah, I can. Actually, I became familiar with that through Andrew, and Andrew had told me about that. I did some research after the fact, but it was pretty neat when Andrew told me that. I don't know. I can't speak on the individuals that were involved because I don't know myself. I did learn it from Andrew, to be completely honest with you, Mr. McCandles. But actually, can I just, I'm gonna give this one to Andrew because I know he knows a lot more on the topic than I do, and I don't want to say anything that's false.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.
So there was a recent publication that the Historical Society put out about the Underground Railroad's impact in Lawrence County. In it, we were able to find through Dr. Susan Linville and Elizabeth Hoover Dorizio, they were able to find these conductors as well as abolitionists. And so the conductors were directly involved with securing a passageway for former slaves to freedom. And so within the community itself, Septimus Cadwallader, the Sharpless family, they were identified as conductors. There was a newspaper in Lima, Ohio, that documented a lot of this, the conversations about the Underground Railroad, and that was used as a primary resource in identifying a lot of these individuals. So if you wanted to learn more about the Underground Railroad, I would direct you to purchasing the book. It's available at the Historical Society, and it is a great compendium of history. And the tavern is in the book, and so I'm not going to spoil it for whether or not it is or not. A lot of times people say that it is, so I'll let you purchase the book and read it to figure out that question. The Tavern in New Wilmington.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. We have a question in the chat by Dr. Lar. Would you like to ask it?
Sure, thanks. And thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, and I don't know if you know this or not, if you have had, if you have found the documents that suggest one way or the other, but I was really curious about whether or not this community associated with either the Orthodox or the Hicksite groups after the 1820s and that big schism that occurred.
Gabby, would you be able to answer that?
Kind of, not exactly, but kind of. So we struggled quite a bit to find, Andrew and I struggled quite a bit to find specific information about the Quakers in Quakertown, specifically how they practiced their religion. For example, we discovered, or at least we think based on the evidence, they actually didn't have their own meeting place, which for everyone here, Quakers like religious weekly ceremonies were called meetings. So instead, we found records of families that we knew lived in Quakertown at a point, but their records of weddings or other things like that were actually in places in Ohio or down closer to Pittsburgh. So we have been really unable to find any specific mention of like their religious doctrine in Quakertown itself. And it seems like it was, well, we know it was always a very small community in that sense.
Here another question. I see Evelyn.
Yeah, I had a question. Where are these artifacts being stored, and is there any idea for a presentation in the future for these artifacts?
So we've kind of talked about the possibility of them eventually being on display in some capacity, but right now they are being processed in a church. Andrew, what's the name exactly of the church?
We're processing them currently in Third Independent Presbyterian Church on East Washington Street. Because there are 30 boxes, we didn't want to overwhelm the Historical Society because of space constraints.
Okay, thank you very much for everybody's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. All right, are there any other questions? Seeing none, I want to go ahead and proceed.
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough with the unmute. So I just had a question about what your next steps are in terms of this area, if any. I know um, we heard a little bit about kind of the plans for the park, but I wondered if there was, additional research being done about the historical artifacts that you're kind of processing at this point.
Yeah, there's actually going to be another internship, right, Andrew and Gab? Yeah, so it's a continuing project. Right now, I'm going to try to finish assessing a good portion of them, but I don't think I'll be done anytime soon. Also, we need somebody to work on the bones, probably with a biology degree, because it's definitely something that I cannot do. And that was kind of the original, like I spent like 25 minutes on a bone and I said, Andrew, what should I do? He's like, just don't touch another bone. So there's that side of things that it makes it a very challenging project. So that's definitely another tier of the project. I don't know if that means that there'll be 2 more internships or not, but I know that there's 1 more in the spring, no matter what.
That's awesome. You've done all the students that have been talking tonight have done some amazing work. Andrew, you are really serving as an amazing mentor for them. This is an awesome project.
I'm happy to have it for them. We do have Dr. Martin is on the line as well. So Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Andrew. I love the word mentor when it comes to Andrew. I remember him when he was a undergraduate, and here he comes off now with a degree after that and doing this amazing work and reconnecting with our students. And the other word that comes to mind besides mentor is the interdisciplinary nature of both of these presentations, tonight's and last week's. Logan has made a point of not knowing anything about bones. But he's also demonstrated that he knows an awful lot about historical documents and artifacts. So the thing that excites me about what Andrew's doing with our students and for the community is putting on display for everyone the interrelatedness of all of these disciplines that we have departments for at universities, and sometimes develop and work in isolation to each other. So what I think is really exciting about this project is that it really does require pulling on lots of different strings, lots of different competencies. And for students who are, in Logan's case, one of our better, he would like to think best, but I'll say better, history majors, he's getting exposure to material culture. He's getting exposure to primary sources from the period of the early 20th century, late 19th century. He's seeing the limits of disciplinary approaches when he's holding one of these bones and understanding he doesn't have the lens yet to make something of it, which is fine. I would be in the same at the same loss. But what you learn is that you drag somebody in who does. So all of these these are insights and skill sets that I think are really really very important, and I think really show the importance of, if you don't mind me pounding on this message again, of the humanities, even in areas and forms of research that that you might not think that they're the first thing that you would use. Imagine this presentation without the history. It just couldn't have been done. So bravo to you all, and a big thank you to Andrew.
I would go remiss without introducing or allowing Rebecca Schaefer to give an opportunity to give comment. She's from the planning department in the county. Not to call you out, but I am.
Thanks, Andrew. I am pleasantly surprised, and I'm not surprised at all when it comes to Andrew Henley. I've known him for so many years. And he arrived in my office when I first started there. And from then on, we have had a wonderful working relationship. I can't imagine going forward without him and his expertise. So with that, I thank you for everything, Logan and Gabrielle, and most of all, Andrew. And anytime you need me to call or talk, I'm here.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and we appreciate all the work you've done with opening the park. It's a beautiful park. I encourage you all to visit it. If you're going on the way to Ohio, it will be right before Night Tracks, which is a bar. So you can always stop there and get some food too after exploring it. And so I will move forward because I know we're going over an hour. I appreciate you all staying on, but I want to give this opportunity to the Lawrence County Historical Society. Jamie, I have you on the line still, and I see some other members of the Historical Society. I'll give the opportunity as well for Elaine Chambers, if you're comfortable with it, to talk about volunteering. And Jamie, if you want to talk about membership or donations or about the Historical Society, please unmute and you're welcome to proceed.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Chambers, and I have 35 years where I retired from Pennsylvania Vital Records. So I have a background in documents, in births and deaths and that. And it segued right into volunteering at the Historical Society. I said last week, I'm a lifelong Lawrence Countyan. I'm a history buff. I'm a genealogy buff. Working at the Historical Society just seems to be a joy because we're a hidden treasure. There's so many things that go on at the Historical Society, so many documents, so many archive and pieces of history that would be lost if we didn't have somewhere to showcase it. And that's basically what we do in the mansion is we do showcase different things. We actually have a room up there dedicated to the Underground Railroad and to like Vitelli, the fireworks, and Shenango pottery. These are all things that we could easily lose. I mean, as we look back and we know that we were a huge tin mill and the industries in our county have gone, but we do have people who, like me, enjoy digging into the history, enjoy the research, and just enjoy being a part of our county. Thank you.
And just to build off of some of the things that Elaine touched on, our volunteers effectively are our means of operation. Without them, we would have such a hard time getting everything we need to do done. And if you love history, it would be, and you want to volunteer with us, it would be an excellent opportunity to work with these documents, work with these processes, artifacts, and it's a learning experience every time we get something new in. Some of the major projects we're working on right now, we're working on validating the files for and information for the declarations of intention, which were the first portion of the immigration process, where they apply and declare their intent to immigrate. And we are working on the beginning stages of the second half of digitizing the petitions for naturalization, where after they've declared their intent to immigrate, then they'd be naturalized after a petition period. We're also working on digitizing marriage licenses. Another major project we're working on is sorting through our clothing and textile collections, working to reorganize them and store them in better conditions. Otherwise, we always need volunteers to help out with building and grounds maintenance, cutting grass, clipping hedges, general grounds work, repairs. And another thing that we majorly need volunteers for right now November 9th, we are looking to move our Christmas decorations from storage to be able to decorate the mansion for the holidays. And if anyone listening to this would be interested, you can contact our volunteer coordinator, Claudia Manley. Two forms that I know of for certain. You can contact her at cmanley@lawrencechs.org, or alternatively, we do have a volunteer interest form on our website at lawrencechs.org. As for donations and memberships, those also help fund everything we do. They do help keep us running, and every membership, every donation, we appreciate it because every little bit helps us as best as you can.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. I did want to say membership is our largest revenue stream at the Lawrence County Historical Society, and it's really what keeps us afloat. We are no longer, we only receive about $4,000 from the state, and we are no longer funded by the county. We hope that changes, but this is something where the organization has really served their community for around 80 years. Over 80 years. And our facility is a beautiful 1904, 1905 Victorian house, which we've been able to preserve our artifacts in climate controlled storage on the 3rd floor. But as with everything, our air conditioners are reaching the end of its life. And so those will be an immediate expense that we're probably going to be seeing within the next couple of years. If you are a member of the county, please talk to your commissioners. And sorry, Dan, I'm going to point to you as well, but talk to not only Dan, talk to the other 2 commissioners about how we can fund the Historical Society through the county once again. It was unfortunate that we were cut from the budget, but this is a great opportunity to work civically and see how the county and the Historical Society can once again work together. And so I appreciate everyone for joining us this evening. Here are some other thank yous. Thank you for all the hosts this evening. Thank you to Carol Montgomery, the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement at Westminster. Chad Surfoss, our new Director of the Professional Development Center. Ed Petrus, the President of the Historical Society. Lorraine Petrus and Stephanie Felina, the Programming Co-Chairs of the Historical Society. And Kathy Wisniewski, the former Administrator of the Historical Society. Our next presentation will be The Health of Lawrence County Immigrants, presented by Ryan Armstrong next Thursday at 7 o'clock. Appreciate you all joining us this evening. Thank you.